The world today feels like it's sitting in an airport terminal at 3 a.m., tense, over-caffeinated, convinced something big is about to take off or crash. Iran is once again framed as the next imminent collapse, the next domino waiting for a well-timed shove.
The US leader says big and very powerful ships are already headed there, reinforcing his warning that time is running out for Tehran.
Western headlines whisper it. Israeli officials say it loudly, and think tanks in Washington game it out on glossy maps. Iran is on the path towards imminent regime change, and behind that assumption is an even more dangerous one, that Iran can be treated like Iraq, that with enough airstrikes, enough pressure, enough surgical destruction of infrastructure, the Islamic Republic will simply unravel, that the regime is brutal, that its people are just waiting for the sound of American or Israeli jets to liberate them from history. This is not analysis, it's nostalgia for a unipolar moment that no longer exists. Former US Defense Secretary Robert Gates once warned, anyone who thinks war in the Middle East would be short or easy is profoundly mistaken. And yet, here we are again, recycling the same illusions, just swapping Baghdad for Tehran. Israel and its allies speak openly about Iran as an existential threat. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has repeatedly insisted that Iran is months away from catastrophe or capability, depending on the year, that is. The logic follows that a decisive strike now can solve the problem. But the idea that bombardment equals regime change is not only naive, it's ahistorical, and the United States should know about this.
And there's an image of the last American soldier to leave Afghanistan after weeks of chaos.
Washington does not want another Iraq. It does not want boots on the ground, body bags coming home, or a region imploding under the weight of yet another state collapse. Yet it is being dragged slowly, publicly, and awkwardly by Israeli pressure into maintaining the illusion that regime change is both possible and desirable.
Obviously, we'd like to see a regime change, at least I would, in Iran, just as I would like to see in Iraq. The question now is a practical question. What is the best place to proceed? It's not a question of whether Iraq's regime should be taken out, but when should it be taken out? It's not a question of whether you'd like to see a regime change in Iran, but how to achieve it.
To be honest, most of this Zionist misinformative rhetoric is aimed at misdirection, away from its own immorality in the occupied territories. That tension, though, between what the United States knows and what it is being pushed to enable, is where this story really begins. One of the greatest analytical failures in Western thinking about Iran is the obsession with individuals. Kill this general, sanction that group, assassinate those scientists, remove that president, and then wait for collapse. But Iran is not Saddam Hussein, it's not Bashar al-Assad. It is not Muammar al-Gaddafi. Iran is not held together by a single man or even a small cabal. It is a layered, redundant, institutionalized system engineered over 4 decades to survive shock, attrition, and decapitation. When Qasem Soleimani was assassinated in 2020, Western media predicted chaos. What happened instead? A funeral procession spanning cities, a controlled retaliation, and the quiet appointment of a successor within days. As former CIA analyst Kenneth Pollack noted, the system absorbed the blow. That's what resilient regimes do. And to fully understand this resilience, at the top sits the theocratic leadership, the supreme leader, currently Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who's not a lone ruler in a palace. His authority is reinforced through overlapping bodies, the office of the supreme leader, which leads and coordinates across institutions, the Guardian Council, a 12-member body which filters legislation and candidates for the presidency, the composition of its government, and parliament, the Assembly of Experts, a body of 88 clerics theoretically empowered to appoint or dismiss the supreme leader, the Expediency Council, a body appointed by the supreme leader resolving deadlocks between all state organs, and a judiciary council that reinforces ideological boundaries and manages the revolutionary courts. This isn't democracy by a long shot, but it's not chaos either. It is structured continuity. Then comes the dual military and security architecture, arguably the most misunderstood aspect of Iran. Iran does not rely on a single army, it has two. The Artesh, or regular armed forces, tasked with territorial defense, and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, a parallel military designed explicitly to protect the revolution from internal and external threats. Add to that the Al-Quds force, operating both locally and abroad, the Basij, a mass mobilization and social control force embedded in neighborhoods and universities, the Ministry of Intelligence and Security, the nation's primary intelligence agency, which conducts surveillance and manages operations to protect the regime, and the Law Enforcement Command, the regular police force handling internal order. And with all these different layers, you start to understand that this duplication is not inefficiency, it's insurance. As Iranian-American scholar Vali Nasser explains, this system is designed so no single institution can overthrow it, and no single failure can collapse it. Then there are the economic pillars, often ignored but absolutely central. The IRGC itself operates ports, construction firms, energy projects, telecommunications, and logistics networks all across the country. The Bonyads, vast charitable parastatal foundations controlling huge swaths of the economy. Sanctions don't weaken the system, they often consolidate it, pushing economic activity further into semi-state hands. And finally, we have the communications and ideological networks. IRIB, the state broadcaster, shapes national narratives and is invested in heavily to promote the threats that are facing the regime and nation. The clerical centers of Qum, the heart of the theocratic class, continue producing religious legitimacy. Education, media, and ritual reinforce a worldview where the regime is not separate from the nation, but its defender. This is why removing individuals changes nothing. Iran doesn't fail because someone dies. It endures because the system closes ranks. Regime change is not a tweet, it's not a sanction, and it's certainly not a cruise missile. Every successful regime change in modern history requires one thing above all: an army willing to switch sides. Either through a coup or mass defection, the monopoly on violence must fracture. That has not happened in Iran, and structurally, it's designed not to happen. Iran's dual military system ensures that no single command can decide the fate of the state. Even if elements of the Artesh were to rebel, they would face the IRGC. If parts of the IRGC fractured, internal intelligence and the Basij would counterbalance. More importantly, there is ideological and familial overlap between these institutions. Officers marry into clerical families. Economic interests intertwine. Loyalties are layered. As Rand analyst Michael Einstein put it, you don't get a clean coup in Iran, you get a civil war. And that's the point most advocates of regime change avoid. Because the only plausible path to toppling the Islamic Republic is not a palace coup, it's a full-scale internal war, fought street by street, institution by institution, with death abundant and a broken nation the result. And no external power can control how that ends.
And by the way, there's another beautiful armada floating beautifully toward Iran right now. So we'll see.
Here's the quiet truth. The United States does not truly want regime change in Iran. It wants containment, deterrence, pressure, distance. Bombs launched from thousands of miles away are politically manageable. Coffins are not. Former President Barack Obama was blunt about this reality, saying, "There are no easy answers when it comes to Iran. Military action would have consequences that we can't fully control."
The president said pointedly that war is, quote, not a game.
When I see the casualness with which some of these folks talk about war, I'm reminded of the costs involved in war.
Yet the narrative of total collapse is relentlessly pushed, largely by Israeli leadership and aligned lobbying networks. For Israel, chaos in Iran is not necessarily a bug, it's a feature. A fractured Iran totally weakens Hezbollah, destabilizes Iraq further, and keeps the region in a permanent state of threat, one that justifies Israel's own security posture indefinitely. Critics like Israeli historian Ilan Pappé have long argued that regional chaos functions as strategic cover. Disorder becomes proof. Resistance to the likes of invasion and occupation becomes barbarism. And in that chaos, extremist groups thrive. Iraq taught us this. Libya confirmed it. Syria sealed it. Regime collapse does not produce liberal democracy. It produces militias, war economies, and ideologies far worse than what existed before. But Washington remembers this, even if it pretends not to. The question is not whether the United States knows the risks, it's whether it will once again ignore them. I really do appreciate you taking the time and watching the Khamenei Chronicles. Please do join our community by subscribing so that you don't miss out on any content regarding the Arab and Muslim history, identity, and modern condition. And if you really do enjoy the channel week in and week out and would like to support us even further, please do join us at our YouTube membership program as well as on Patreon. Thanks again. Let's ground this in reality. Iran has nearly 100 million people. Iraq had 25 million in 2003. Iran's territory is 4 times larger, with mountains, deserts, and urban centers built for endurance, not occupation. Former US General Anthony Zinni once warned, anyone who thinks Iran would be Iraq on repeat hasn't looked at the map or the people. When we look internally, it's a mistake to assume that the Iranian population in its entirety is marching towards regime collapse as a final destination. What many Iranians express inside the country and in the diaspora is not a hunger for destruction, but a demand for reform with continuity, greater economic opportunity, social breathing room, less corruption, and meaningful integration into the global system often rank higher than ideological revolution. Change for many is imagined as adjustment rather than rupture. This complicates the fantasy of automatic regime change as a universal solution. A system can be deeply criticized and yet preferred to the uncertainty of collapse. Iraq, Libya, and Syria loom large as cautionary tales. For a population that has endured war, sanctions, and isolation, stability, however imperfect, remains a powerful anchor, and reform a safer horizon than chaos. In addition, internationally speaking, there are also China and Russia, who won't sit idly as invasion occurs. Neither will watch passively as a cornerstone of their regional strategy collapses. Economic ties, military coordination, and diplomatic cover are already in place. And the most critical element of all about the Iranian people, any foreign invasion would truly unify Iranians across ideological lines. History shows this clearly. After the 1979 revolution, Iran was anything but unified. Power struggles erupted between Islamists, leftists, nationalists, and remnants of the old order. Purges, executions, and institutional chaos defined the early years. Yet when Saddam Hussein invaded in 1980, fragmentation collapsed into unity. Political rivals, clerics, workers, and students closed ranks. The war became sacred defense, and Iraq paid dearly for awakening a nation forged through invasion. External aggression collapses internal divisions real fast. And add to that the certainty of religious mobilization, and the fantasy of a quick victory disappears entirely. Iran is not weak, it is pressured. Those are not the same thing. The final truth sits uncomfortably between Washington and Tel Aviv, and it is this: the United States and Israel are no longer reading from the same script. One, although loudly outspoken, infers a language of restraint, escalation management, and domestic consequence. The other speaks the language of existential urgency, red lines, and perpetual preemption. That gap matters. The defining question then is not Iran's resilience, that's already been proven, but America's resolve to act in its own interest. Will Washington resist the gravitational pull of Israeli pressure and one of the most powerful lobbying ecosystems in modern politics? Or will it once again outsource its Middle East policy to another state's threat perception? History offers a warning. From Iraq to Libya, American power has too often been mobilized by worst-case narratives that later collapsed under the weight of reality. Regime change was promised, regional disorder delivered. Policymakers knew the risks, acknowledged them privately, then proceeded anyway, because walking back pressure proved harder than resisting it at the start. Boots on the ground are politically toxic, yet drift has a way of becoming destiny. Incremental strikes invite retaliation. Retaliation invites escalation, and escalation, sooner or later, demands commitment. So the question lingers, unanswered and uncomfortable. Will the United States draw a firm line between alliance and obedience, or will it once again mortgage its own stability, soldiers, and global credibility for the ambitions of another nation?